Imagine you send an email to your boss. You've been working this massive project for weeks, and you finally hit send.
Yeah.
And you wait.
Just staring at the screen.
Exactly, staring. An hour goes by, no reply. 2 hours, still nothing. By hour 3, you are just entirely convinced you're getting fired.
Oh, absolutely. The spiral starts.
Right. Your heart is racing, your palms are sweating, your stomach is in knots. You are essentially reacting to like a tiger in the room. But the room is empty.
Yeah, the tiger hasn't attacked.
It might not even exist.
Yeah.
But your nervous system is, it's sounding a 5-alarm fire anyway.
It's a completely visceral response. And what's fascinating here is that the trigger isn't a negative event at all. The trigger is simply the absence of information.
Yes. The dark, empty room of the unknown. So today we're taking you on a deep dive into one of the most universal and frankly just the most exhausting human experiences.
It really is exhausting.
It is. It's this profound, sometimes paralyzing discomfort of not knowing what comes next. We're unpacking something called the intolerance of uncertainty, or IOU.
Right.
And we're not just philosophizing about it today. We're going to look under the hood of exactly how this intolerance drives anxiety. And we'll walk step by step through the highly structured cognitive behavioral protocol that clinicians use to actually dismantle it.
Yeah, and to do this, we are pulling from a really robust stack of sources. We have a comprehensive guide to the Dugas and Robichaud CBT protocol for generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD.
Which is super detailed.
Very. But before we get to the treatment, we have to understand the hardware. So we're also integrating neurobiological research on the uncertainty and anticipation model of anxiety, the UEMA.
But wait, there's a twist. Because, human beings aren't just clean, predictable hardware.
Definitely not.
So we're throwing a massive wild card into the mix today, which is mood. We're looking at clinical research on emotional lability and cyclothymia.
Plus, we're pulling from Professor R.J. Starr's work on the psychology of routine.
Right, alongside that really fascinating study on self-injected biologic medications. Our mission today is to see what happens when the incredibly precise machinery of cognitive behavioral therapy collides with the unpredictable, messy reality of human biology.
It's a collision, for sure. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to start with that empty room you mentioned earlier.
The unanswered email room.
Exactly. The UEMA, the uncertainty and anticipation model of anxiety, it gives us the actual neurobiological blueprint for why that unanswered email feels so dangerous.
Okay.
Anxiety disorders at their core share a common feature. It's this excessive maladaptive anticipatory response when a threat is uncertain.
Right, but what does maladaptive anticipatory response actually mean inside the brain? I feel like we throw around terms like brain chemistry without really explaining the mechanics of it.
That's a fair point.
If I'm sitting there staring at my inbox, what is physically misfiring in my head?
Well, let's look at two specific regions the UEMA highlights. The ventral striatum and the orbitofrontal cortex, or the OFC.
The OFC, okay.
Now, think of these areas as your brain's risk assessment department. Their primary job is to calculate expected value.
Like an actuary.
Exactly like an actuary. Throughout human evolution, this department was crucial. It calculated, if I go to the river, what is the probability I get water versus the probability I get eaten by a crocodile?
So it calculates probability and cost.
Right, a biological cost-benefit analysis. But in a highly anxious brain, one that's dealing with intolerance of uncertainty, this risk assessment department is profoundly broken.
How so?
The research refers to this as a judgment bias. The neural alterations in these areas lead to massively inflated estimates of both the probability of a threat happening and the cost of that threat if it actually does happen.
Okay, let's unpack this with the email example. The actual probability that my boss is ignoring my email because I'm getting fired is, I don't know, maybe 1%.
Probably less. He's probably just in a meeting.
Right. But my broken risk assessment department calculates the probability at like 99%. And the cost calculation is equally broken.
Yeah, it goes off the charts.
The cost isn't just, I'll have to revise the project.
Yeah.
The cost becomes, I will lose my job, I will lose my house, my entire life is over.
Precisely. And the literature points out something highly significant here. Inflating the cost of the event actually contributes more to the pathology than inflating the probability.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Even if your logical brain knows the chance is incredibly small, if your OFC calculates the cost as absolute destruction, your nervous system has no choice but to panic.
Because the stakes are just too high.
Exactly.
So the risk assessment department is sounding the alarm, telling the rest of the brain that a catastrophe is incoming.
Okay.
How does the rest of the brain react to that?
It mobilizes the defense systems, specifically the amygdala.
The fear center.
Right. The amygdala goes into hyperactivity, which leads to severe hypervigilance. Your brain becomes incredibly, almost obsessively attuned to detecting threats. And this creates an interpretation bias.
Which means what exactly? Like, how does interpretation bias change what I'm seeing in the real world?
It means ambiguous stimuli are automatically interpreted as threatening.
Oh, I see.
So a neutral facial expression on a coworker isn't just neutral, it's interpreted as a scowl of judgment.
Or a vaguely worded text message like, we need to talk later.
Perfect example. To an anxious brain, that isn't a scheduling request. It's an impending breakup or a firing.
Wow.
The amygdala is constantly scanning the environment for confirmation of the catastrophe the OSC just predicted. It's a vicious, self-sustaining feedback loop.
It's like wearing glasses that turn every shadow into a monster. So, you have a patient whose brain is locked in this exact neurobiological loop. They walk into a therapist's office.
Yeah.
How on earth does a clinician start fixing a risk assessment department that is this profoundly compromised?
Yeah.
Because I was looking through the Dugas and Robichaud protocol, and they have a very strict rule for therapists on day one.
They do.
They explicitly state, never present the complete treatment model to the patient right away. Why is that?
Well, there is a very sound clinical rationale for that boundary. Imagine having a broken leg, and the doctor immediately starts explaining the molecular process of bone regeneration.
Right.
And then they go into the history of titanium rods and the 6-month physical therapy schedule, all before even offering you a painkiller.
It'd be totally overwhelming.
Exactly. For a patient whose core issue is an intolerance of uncertainty, dumping the entire architecture of their anxiety onto them at once will simply trigger a massive spike in, you guessed it, anxiety.
Look at this, too much unknown information at once.
Exactly.
So you have to layer it. You start
Yeah.
with the foundation, which is the initial CBT assessment. The therapist has to figure out if generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is actually what's happening.
Right.
And the sources mention specific diagnostic measures, like the GAD-7 and the Penn State Worry Questionnaire. But I want to pause here and push back a little bit on the entire premise.
Okay, push away.
We just talked about the evolutionary basis for the risk assessment department. Worry is a natural evolutionary mechanism designed to keep us alive.
It is.
I worry about paying my taxes so I don't go to jail. I worry about my kids crossing the street so they don't get hurt.
Yeah.
Isn't pathologizing worry and putting people through a rigorous, multi-step psychiatric protocol just, I don't know, a way for modern medicine to medicalize normal, totally functional human stress?
That is a completely valid critique, and to be honest, it is the exact skepticism that a good therapist expects from a patient during the assessment phase.
Really? They expect pushback?
Oh, absolutely. The goal of the assessment is not to pathologize normal human functioning. This is where psychoeducation begins, utilizing a concept called the worry continuum.
Okay, explain the continuum, because if I'm sitting in that chair, I'm definitely thinking, everyone worries, why am I broken?
The clinician draws a line. On one end, at 0%, you have absolutely zero worry.
Which sounds nice, but
Which, biologically speaking, is incredibly dangerous. If you have zero worry, you step into traffic without looking.
good point.
Somewhere in the middle, around 40 or 50%, you have adaptive worry. That's the functional stress that makes you double-check your tax return and put a seatbelt on your child.
The helpful kind.
Right. But on the far end, approaching 80, 90, 100%, you have excessive, debilitating worry.
And the questionnaires measure where you are on that line.
Exactly. The GAD-7 doesn't just ask, do you worry? It asks questions like, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by not being able to start or control worrying?
Oh, the loss of control.
Yes, and the Penn State Worry Questionnaire asks patients to rate statements like, my worries overwhelm me. By reviewing these criteria with the patient, the therapist is actually doing something incredibly validating.
How so? Like, how is taking a test validating?
Because they are telling the patient your instinct to worry is normal. But the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of the worry you are experiencing are excessive. Your machinery is stuck in overdrive.
It validates their distress without condemning their basic humanity.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's the difference between a functional thermostat and one that's just stuck blasting the heat in the middle of summer.
Perfect analogy.
So once the assessment establishes that the patient is on the excessive end of that continuum, the protocol shifts into data collection.
Right.
The therapist needs to see exactly what this worry looks like in the wild. And to do that, they use a very specific tool, the worry diary.
And this isn't just, a blank journal where you write down your feelings.
Dear diary, I feel anxious today.
Exactly, that doesn't work. A generic diary doesn't force the cognitive differentiation necessary for CBT. The Dugas and Robichaud worry diary demands categorization.
Okay.
The patient must separate their thoughts into two distinct columns, type 1 worries and type 2 worries.
Let's break this down because this distinction really seems like the bedrock of the whole treatment.
It is. Type 1 worries are current, actual problems. They are rooted in present reality.
Like, my car broke down today and I need to figure out how to pay for the mechanic. Or, I have a deadline at 5 p.m. and I am severely behind.
Real things happening right now.
Yes, these are situations that require immediate practical problem solving.
And type 2 worries.
Type 2 worries are hypothetical, the what-ifs. These are the scenarios playing out entirely in the theater of the mind, projected into the future.
So what if I lose my job next year and can't afford a car?
Exactly. Or what if I miss this deadline and my boss tells the entire industry I'm incompetent? The threat hasn't happened, and importantly, it may never happen.
Okay, so the patient tracks this for a week. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. The sources mentioned that the original protocol was updated in 2019.
Yes, the revised model.
They added a third column to this diary. It wasn't enough to just write down the what if. They asked the patient to track how they responded to the worry, specifically tracking their safety and avoidance behaviors. Why add that?
Because it bridges the gap between cognition and action. It's one thing to realize you have a lot of hypothetical worries.
Right.
It's an entirely different level of self-awareness to realize that every time you have a hypothetical worry, you physically do something to try and neutralize the discomfort of it.
Okay, let's walk through a real-world example of this diary in action to see how the cycle actually works.
Yeah.
Because tracking this leads directly into the next phase, which is mapping the architecture of anxiety.
Right. The patient brings the diary back, and the therapist shows them the trap they've built for themselves.
The updated formulation maps this sequence with brutal clarity. It starts with a situation.
Okay.
That situation triggers the hypothetical what-ifs. Those what-ifs spiral into worry. The cognitive worry generates physical and emotional anxiety.
And then?
To cope with the unbearable physical feeling of that anxiety, the person engages in safety behaviors. And the ultimate consequence of this entire sequence is exhaustion and demoralization.
The text gives a fantastic, highly relatable example of this. Let's use the meeting scenario.
Oh yeah, I love this one. Let's do it.
The situation is simply waiting in the conference room for a weekly team meeting to start.
Okay, pretty standard.
But then the what-ifs begin firing. What if the boss calls on me and I don't know the answer? What if I stumble over my words and look stupid? What if they all realize I'm an imposter?
The risk assessment department has decided the cost of this meeting is social and professional death.
Right, so that cognitive what-ifs becomes relentless worry. The person literally cannot stop rehearsing the worst-case scenarios in their head.
And that worry cascades into physical anxiety. Their heart rate spikes, they feel nauseous, they're sweating, they are physically tense.
And sitting in that state of physiological hyperarousal is agonizing. You can't just endure it indefinitely. So the brain seeks a release valve. It deploys a safety behavior.
So in this meeting scenario, maybe the safety behavior is mental rehearsing, like silently repeating a script of what they will say over and over.
Or maybe it's checking their notes 15 times.
Or maybe it's straight up avoidance. They fake a stomachache and go to the bathroom until the meeting is 5 minutes in so they can slip in unnoticed.
Exactly. And what happens after the meeting? Let's say the meeting is completely standard, nobody gets fired. But how does the patient feel?
Completely, utterly drained. The text calls it exhaustion and demoralization. They might have to go home and lie in a dark room for 2 hours just to recover from a Tuesday morning staff meeting.
It's totally depleting.
Well, we have to ask why it's so exhausting. This brings up my absolute favorite metaphor from the source material, the firefighting analogy.
Oh, it's brilliant. It perfectly illustrates the concept of intolerance of uncertainty acting as the fuel for this entire cycle.
So imagine putting on full firefighting gear. The heavy insulated boots, the thick canvas pants, the 70-pound oxygen tank strapped to your back, the massive rigid helmet.
You're sweating just putting it on.
Exactly. And you are holding a heavy pressurized fire hose.
Yeah.
And you are standing in your living room, staring intently at the floorboards.
And there is no fire.
There's no fire. There's barely even a spark. Maybe there's a tiny microscopic ember that floated in from the chimney. but you are terrified of the uncertainty of a fire.
Right.
So you turn the hose on blast, you drench the carpet, you ruin the drywall, you flood the entire house just to feel in control of the possibility that a fire might have happened.
And you are standing there carrying 80 pounds of wet gear for hours. It is an agonizing expenditure of energy.
It really is.
And the tragedy is, if you ask the person in the firefighting suit why they don't just take it off, they will tell you that the suit is the only thing keeping them alive.
Wow.
This reveals a deeply counterintuitive psychological paradox within the CBT model. People with intolerance of uncertainty hold fiercely positive beliefs about their worry.
Hold on. If worry is the heavy, exhausting suit that is ruining their life and flooding their living room, how can they possibly view it as a positive thing?
Because the brain is an association machine. The protocol identifies 5 distinct positive beliefs patients hold about worry.
Okay, what are they?
1, they believe worry helps solve problems. 2, they believe it motivates them to get things done.
Like it's a productivity hack.
Exactly. 3, they believe it prepares them for negative events. 4, they believe worrying actually prevents negative emotions when a bad thing does happen, like it acts as an emotional shock absorber.
If I worry about it now, it won't hurt as much later.
Right. And what's the 5th?
The 5th is perhaps the most insidious, especially socially. They believe that worrying shows that they care.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Like, if I don't worry sick about my child going on this field trip, it means I'm a negligent parent.
Exactly.
That is such a deeply ingrained cultural narrative. We equate anxiety with love and responsibility. So as a therapist, how do you dismantle a belief system that is tied to someone's core identity as a good parent or a dedicated employee? You can't just tell them they're wrong.
You absolutely cannot just contradict them. If you attack their coping mechanism, they will defend it harder.
Human nature.
Right. Instead, the Dugas and Robichaud protocol uses a brilliant cognitive intervention called the defending worry role play. You ask the patient to essentially put their worry on trial, but they have to argue both sides.
How does that actually work in practice? Like, what does that conversation look like?
The therapist will say, okay, I want you to imagine we are in a formal debate. Your position is that worry prepares you for bad things. Convince me.
Right.
The patient will lay out their best arguments. Well, if I worry about getting fired, I work harder, so I won't get fired.
Makes logical sense on the surface.
Right. Then the therapist flips the script. They say, excellent argument. Now, switch podiums. You are now arguing the counterpoint. Challenge the idea that worry prepares you.
Oh, that's clever. That forces them to actively look for the flaws in their own logic without feeling attacked by the therapist.
Exactly. When forced to articulate the counter-argument, the patient usually realizes, wait, worrying about getting fired doesn't make me work better. It makes me so anxious I make mistakes. Or I spend 5 hours obsessing over one email instead of doing my actual job.
Right.
They realize the preparation is just an illusion.
Which perfectly sets up the concept of negative problem orientation. Because the issue isn't that these patients are bad at solving problems. They're usually incredibly smart, capable people.
Very much so.
The issue is how their brain reacts to the mere presence of a problem.
Right. They lack the orientation to approach a problem effectively because the uncertainty surrounding the problem triggers the Uwama hyperarousal.
And here we have to bring in another visceral analogy from the text to explain this. The crystal dome. I want you, the listener, to really picture this. Imagine you are standing inside one of those giant, clear, plastic fan domes they use on game shows.
Oh yeah, where you grab the money.
Exactly. You step inside, the door locks, and the massive fan at the bottom kicks on.
And what's blowing around inside the dome?
Tickets. Thousands of them. And there are 2 types. The vast majority are silver tickets. These silver tickets represent your type 2 worries, the hypothetical what-ifs. They are swirling everywhere. But mixed in, floating around, are just a few gold tickets. The gold tickets are your type 1 worries, the actual present moment problems that you physically need to solve right now.
But the fan is turned up to maximum capacity.
It's hurricane force. The wind is roaring in your ears, the silver tickets are whipping across your face, blinding you. You are completely overwhelmed by the sensory input of all these hypothetical worries.
It's blinding.
So what do you do about the gold tickets, the actual problems?
You do nothing. You curl into a ball.
Exactly, you give up. You cannot possibly see, let alone reach out and grab a gold ticket when you are being blinded by a blizzard of silver ones. The anxiety paralyzes your problem-solving abilities.
Right.
Now, the goal of CBT isn't to magically make the silver tickets vanish from existence. The goal is to turn down the fan.
And turning down the fan means bringing the patient's attention back to the present moment.
Right. As you focus on the present, on your breathing, on the physical reality of the room, the fan speed drops. The silver tickets slowly lose momentum and flutter to the floor.
And suddenly,
hanging there in the air, is a gold ticket. You can see the actual problem clearly, and you can grab it and take action.
this metaphor beautifully illustrates the clinical shift from a threat-focused mindset to an opportunity-focused mindset, which the protocol utilizes.
The threat-opportunity continuum.
Yes. When the fan is on high, the patient is experiencing all-or-nothing threat-focused thinking. The physiological arousal, the racing heart, it convinces them that the threat is imminent, and their ability to cope is basically zero. They are stuck on the threat end of that continuum.
Let's use a mundane example here. Say the gold ticket is, I need to call the doctor to schedule a minor procedure. It's an actual problem that needs solving.
A classic type 1 worry.
Right. But if I'm threat-focused, my brain says, what if the line is busy? What if the receptionist is mean? What if the procedure goes wrong? What if I have a rare allergic reaction to the anesthetic?
The silver tickets.
The silver tickets are blinding me, so I just avoid making the call.
To slide down that continuum toward opportunity, the therapist asks the patient to explicitly list the benefits of approaching the task. What is the opportunity here?
Okay, so they reframe it.
Right. If I make the call, I cross it off my to-do list. I won't have to think about it tomorrow. I will address a health issue. I will feel a sense of accomplishment.
Oh, that makes sense.
By forcing the brain to articulate the opportunities, you disrupt the negative problem orientation.
Okay, so we've mapped the cognitive architecture. We understand the fuel, the positive beliefs, the blizzard silver tickets. But recognizing the trap doesn't automatically get you out of it.
No, insight isn't enough.
We have to actively dismantle the behaviors that keep the trap shut. This is where the protocol gets intensely behavioral, testing safety behaviors and cognitive exposure.
Right. We have to address the behaviors the patient uses to maintain the illusion of control. The manual provides a comprehensive look at how intolerance of uncertainty dictates behavior. It categorizes them into things done more and things done less.
Okay, so the done more list is essentially the over-functioning behaviors, needing an excessive amount of information before making even a minor decision. Checking and rechecking locks or emails.
Arriving 30 minutes early for a casual coffee date.
Yes. Making hyper-detailed to-do lists.
Yeah.
Constantly asking friends and partners for reassurance.
And then the done list lists are the avoidance behaviors. Refusing to delegate tasks because you just can't tolerate the uncertainty of someone else doing it wrong.
Or procrastinating.
Procrastinating is a huge one. Avoiding long-term commitments in jobs or relationships because the future is unknown. Even mental avoidance, like aggressively trying to suppress a disturbing thought.
So here is where I want to challenge the CBT model again, because human behavior usually has a logical root.
Sure.
Let's say I am terrified of looking stupid in a presentation. So I engage in a done more safety behavior. I over-prepare. I spend 20 hours researching a 10-minute presentation. I write a script. I memorize it. I practice it in the mirror until 3 a.m.
A classic coping mechanism.
I go into the meeting, I deliver it perfectly, and I don't look stupid. My safety behavior worked. It protected me.
It feels like it did.
So why does the CBT manual emphatically state that these safety behaviors actually cause the anxiety to persist?
That is the million-dollar question in anxiety treatment. To answer it, we have to look at a concept deeply tied to the UMAMA model called deficient safety learning.
Deficient safety learning, okay.
And to explain this, let's step away from the office and use a classic visceral psychological example, a severe dog phobia.
Okay, I am terrified of dogs.
You are absolutely terrified. You step out of your front door to get the mail, you look down the street, and 50 yards away, you see a neighbor walking a dog.
I see it.
Instantly, your amygdala fires. Your heart pounds, your pupils dilate, adrenaline floods your system. You immediately engage in an avoidance safety behavior. You slam the door, lock it, and run back into your bedroom.
My heart is racing. I'm gasping for air.
Exactly. You sit on your bed. After 20 minutes, your adrenaline naturally metabolizes. Your heart rate slows down. You feel a massive wave of relief. You survived.
Thank goodness.
But here is the critical failure. What did your brain learn?
Well, my brain learned that running away saved my life.
Precisely. Your brain attributed your survival entirely to your avoidance behavior. It logged the data. The dog was going to kill us, but because we ran inside and locked the door, we lived.
Oh, wow.
What your brain failed to learn was the objective reality of the situation. It failed to learn that the dog was a golden retriever on a short leash, controlled by a responsible owner 50 yards away, and posed absolute zero threat to you.
Wow. So I never learned that the street was actually safe.
Never. Because your safety behavior interrupted the learning process. Safety behaviors prevent the brain from learning habituation.
They act as a block.
They do. Every single time you use a safety behavior, whether it's running from a dog, checking the stove 10 times, or over-preparing for a presentation for 20 hours, it keeps your brain's perceived threat level artificially high.
Oh, I see.
Your OFC never adjusts its expected value calculation because it firmly believes your behavioral armor is the only reason you didn't die.
So my 20 hours of prep didn't cure my anxiety. It guaranteed that the next time I have a presentation, my brain will demand 21 hours of prep.
Exactly. The monster just grows.
To break the cycle, I have to take off the armor.
You have to run behavioral experiments to challenge the intolerance of uncertainty directly.
And the sources outline a very specific worksheet for this. You don't just wing it. The patient has to systematically choose a safety behavior to drop.
Right.
Let's say the behavior is, I always text my partner when they're driving home to make sure they didn't crash.
A very common reassurance-seeking safety behavior.
Right. So the experiment is, today I will not text them. The worksheet asks the patient to predict what will happen. I predict I will have a panic attack, and I predict they will get in a car wreck.
That's the fear.
Then, the crucial step, they actually do it. They sit with the unbearable uncertainty of not texting. During the experiment, they log their distress level, and afterward, they reflect on the actual outcome.
And what's the outcome? The partner walks through the door. Safe.
And the patient realizes, my distress peaked at a 9, but then it slowly came down to a 4. I survived the feeling, and my partner survived without my text.
Exactly.
The goal isn't to prove the world is 100% safe. Accidents do happen. The goal is to generate experiential data proving that you can tolerate the uncertainty of not knowing.
It's about recalibrating the brain's aversive prediction error signaling. You are teaching the risk assessment department that its calculations are wrong.
You're updating the software.
You are. But behavioral experiments only cover external actions. We also have to address cognitive avoidance, because some hypothetical worries are so intense, so deeply threatening, that the patient's safety behavior is entirely mental.
This is the darkest part of the protocol. What happens when the what if isn't about failing a meeting, but a terrifying, intrusive image, like vividly imagining your house burning down with your family inside.
The natural reflexive human instinct when a horrifying image pops into your head is thought suppression. We violently push it away. We tell ourselves, don't think about that. Stop thinking about it.
But psychology has known for decades that thought suppression is a trap. The classic white bear experiment. If I tell you not to think of a white bear, it's all you can think about.
It creates a massive rebound effect. The more cognitive energy you spend trying to suppress the feared image, the more intense, frequent, and distressing the image becomes.
Because you're paying so much attention to avoiding it.
Exactly. The brain interprets the effort of suppression as evidence that the thought itself is highly dangerous.
So, if suppressing the thought makes it stronger, the treatment has to do the opposite. And the treatment outlined here sounds incredibly brutal. It's called imaginal exposure.
It is the most intense phase of the protocol, which is why it is only introduced after the patient has built cognitive skills.
You don't start with this.
No, absolutely not. Instead of pushing the terrifying image away, the therapist asks the patient to turn and face it entirely. They are instructed to write a worry story.
What does a worry story actually look like?
It is a highly detailed, sensory-rich, scripted account of their absolute worst fear coming true.
Wow.
If the fear is a house fire, they don't just write my house burned down. They write about the smell of the smoke, the sound of the alarms, the heat, the feeling of utter helplessness, the aftermath. They script the catastrophe.
And they don't just write it and throw it away. The protocol demands that they read this script daily. And they record their distress levels before, during, and after reading it, usually on a 0 to 100 scale.
The mechanism at work here is pure neurological habituation.
Explain habituation in this context.
By repeatedly exposing the brain to the feared stimulus, in this case, the internal, imagined scenario, without allowing the patient to use any cognitive avoidance or physical safety behaviors, the brain is forced to process it.
It's like staring at the tiger in the room until your eyes adjust.
Exactly. When they read the script on day 1, their distress might hit 95. The amygdala is screaming.
It's a full panic response.
Yes, but they sit there, breathing, reading it again, Because the actual physical environment they are in, a quiet room holding a piece of paper, contains zero threat, the adrenaline has nowhere to go but down.
It eventually burns out.
Over days and weeks of this daily routine, the adrenaline response simply metabolizes and dies off.
The brain realizes, I am thinking about a fire, but I am not on fire.
Yes, the threat circuitry adjusts the perceived threat to match the actual threat, which is zero. The thought becomes just a thought. It loses its emotional teeth.
That sounds grueling.
It is incredibly difficult work, but when successful, it is profoundly freeing.
Okay. We have mapped out the entire Dugas and Robichaud's CBT machine. It is brilliant. It is logical. It is highly systematic. It relies on consistent data tracking with the diaries, methodical behavioral experiments, and rigorous daily exposure routines. It is an engineering marvel designed to dismantle anxiety. But what happens when the ground this machine is built on starts moving? Because this entire beautifully logical CBT protocol implicitly assumes one massive thing. It assumes that the patient's biological hardware is stable.
Which is a huge assumption.
It assumes that their cognitive anxiety is the primary driver of their distress.
And this brings us to the wild card. This is where the theory of CBT collides with the messy reality of physiological mood disruptors.
We have several sources here focusing on how profound mood swings complicate treatment. We are looking specifically at two conditions: cyclothymia and emotional lethality.
Right.
These aren't just bad moods. These are systemic disruptions.
Yeah.
Let's start by defining the disruptors, starting with cyclothymia.
Cyclothymia, which is sometimes referred to in older literature as bipolar III, is a chronic mood disorder characterized by unpredictable shifts between hypomanic phases and depressive phases.
Okay.
Now, these phases aren't as extreme as a full bipolar imanic episode or a major depressive episode. They are subclinical in intensity, but they are chronic, lasting for years, and they constantly alter the patient's baseline.
And the most disruptive aspect, according to the text, is the unpredictability. A person with cyclothymia can switch from a lethargic, depressed state to an elevated hypomanic state with little to no warning, regardless of their external environment.
And the states themselves are entirely different biological weather systems.
Let's talk about the hypomanic state first.
In a hypomanic state, the brain is flooded with excitatory neurotransmitters. Thoughts speed up. The person becomes highly sociable, excessively talkative, they experience inflated self-esteem, they become highly spontaneous, and they might engage in impulsive behaviors like reckless spending.
And then, weeks or days later, the weather changes. They enter the depressive phase. The excitatory chemicals plummet.
The crash.
They experience profound fatigue, dulled thoughts, a heavy physical lethargy, and a deep desire to isolate themselves from the world.
Now contrast that with emotional lability. Our source from WebMD describes emotional lability as a condition characterized by rapid, exaggerated changes in mood where the individual feels entirely unable to control their emotional expression.
It's often called pseudo-bulbar affect, right?
Yes, PBA is a severe form of it. Emotional lability is frequently seen after brain injuries, strokes, or in neurodivergent profiles like ADHD, where emotional dysregulation is a core feature.
Okay.
With emotional lability, the neurological mechanism that acts as a brake on emotional expression is damaged or malfunctioning.
So we aren't talking about feeling sad because something bad happened. We are talking about uncontrollable sobbing or uncontrollable laughter that completely bypasses the cognitive brain.
Exactly. A person might start weeping uncontrollably at a mundane television commercial, not because they are sad, but because their neurological ability to regulate the expression of the emotion has simply misfired.
Okay, so let's put these two biological disruptors into the CBT machine we just built and see what breaks. I want to play out a scenario.
Go for it.
Say I'm a patient with both GAD and undiagnosed cyclothymia. I am in week 2 of the CBT protocol. I am supposed to be diligently tracking my type 2 hypothetical what-ifs in my worry diary to establish my baseline anxiety for the therapist.
Right, the data collection phase.
But suddenly my cyclothymia swings me into a hypomanic state. My brain chemistry shifts. Suddenly my self-esteem is through the roof. I feel invincible. The future doesn't look uncertain and terrifying, it looks exciting. I'm suddenly buying plane tickets to Vegas and pitching massive risky projects to my boss.
Oh boy.
How does that biological shift skew the entire CBT assessment phase?
It completely, utterly distorts the clinical data. Because during that hypomanic swing, your intolerance of uncertainty might temporarily vanish entirely. You aren't experiencing any hypothetical worries because your brain is currently incapable of processing threat.
So for that entire week, I write a big fat 0 in my worry diary. 0 anxiety, zero safety behaviors.
And the therapist, looking only at the cognitive data provided by the diary, looks at that and thinks, wow, the behavioral experiments work miraculously. The GAD is cured.
They're thrilled.
They draw a false clinical conclusion based on distorted data.
And then what happens when the pendulum swings back?
You crash into the depressive phase. Now your nervous system is so depleted, you're sleeping 14 hours a day, your limbs feel like lead, and you lack the executive function to even find the pen to fill out the diary.
Oh, wow.
The data collection, which the entire protocol relies on for mapping the worry cycle, completely disintegrates.
The machine grinds to a halt. And it completely breaks the elegant logic of the worry cycle we discussed earlier. The CBT model relies on a very clean progression. Situation leads to what if, which leads to worry, which leads to anxiety.
Right, a linear chain.
But if I have emotional ability, the text explicitly notes that feelings often come out of nowhere.
Yes. The CBT model demands that we identify the cognitive trigger, the what-if thought. But with emotional ability, the situation trigger might be entirely physiological, not cognitive or environmental.
If a patient is sitting on their couch, completely relaxed, and suddenly begins weeping uncontrollably due to emotional ability, the therapist asking, what was the what-if thought that preceded the crying, is a futile exercise.
It's worse than futile, it's maddening for the patient. Because there was no thought, there was no cognitive error to correct. It was a neurological hardware misfire.
Yeah.
The clean, logical progression of the cognitive model breaks down entirely because the primary driver of the distress in that moment is biological, not psychological.
And if the patient is dealing with these massive biological fluctuations, how can they possibly maintain the rigorous daily routines required for the treatment? Because reading a horrifying worry script every single day or purposely dropping a safety behavior requires immense discipline and a relatively stable nervous system.
It demands stability. This is exactly why we integrated Professor R.J. Starr's work on the psychology of routine. Starr's core argument is that routine is deeply functional, particularly when it comes to stabilizing an elevated nervous system.
So routine creates safety.
Yes. A routine restores a felt sense of agency and predictability in environments where internal or external control has been lost.
And when you look at it, the entire IOU protocol is a complex cognitive routine. You notice a worry, you log in the diary, you categorize it as type 1 or 2, you challenge the positive belief, you design an experiment. It is a highly structured, repetitive mental rhythm.
Exactly. And to maintain a cognitive routine of that magnitude, you require a foundational degree of physiological stability. We see the profound power of routine vividly illustrated in this supplementary study provided on self-injected biologic medications.
Oh, this study was fascinating. Let's dig into this. It looked at patients who were required to give themselves injections of powerful biologic medications at home, which inherently causes a lot of anxiety.
Right. Injecting yourself with a needle is objectively stressful.
Definitely.
But the researchers found something remarkable. Patients who established a strict, highly sequential routine, a ritual around their injection day, significantly lowered their self-reported anxiety and self-injection distress.
What did the ritual look like?
It was entirely behavioral. Laying out the alcohol swabs, the bandage, and the injector pen on a clean towel in a specific order, doing it at the exact same time of day, sitting in the exact same chair.
The repetition.
The physical repetition of the ritual regulated their nervous system and reduced their cognitive load.
The physical environment became a safety signal that allowed their brain to downregulate. But here is the critical catch for our mental health patients. To build a routine, you need consistent, predictable capacity.
You do.
If cyclothymia causes you to stay awake for 3 days straight, rearranging your garage in a hypomanic state, or sleep for 16 hours in a depressed state, you physically cannot maintain a routine.
It's impossible.
If emotional ability causes you to melt down from the sensory overload of a grocery store, you cannot come home, sit quietly at your desk, and do your imaginal exposure exercise.
You can't. The mood disruptor destroys the routine, and because CBT is entirely reliant on the routine, the mood disruptor destroys the treatment protocol.
This highlights the absolute non-negotiable necessity of combined tracking and adaptive support. A clinician cannot just hand a patient a worry diary and assume it's capturing the whole picture.
Absolutely not.
If a patient has a complex presentation, they must track both specific cognitive anxiety triggers and general biological mood patterns over time.
The Medical News Today source emphasizes exactly this point, distinguishing mental mood changes from hormonal or neurological ones.
But how do you actually tell them apart in practice? If a patient comes in feeling awful, how do you know if it's a type 2 worry spiral or a biological crash?
It requires the clinician to look at the broader, holistic context of the patient's biology.
Like what?
Are these mood swings tied to the menstrual cycle, suggesting premenstrual dysphoric disorder or PMDD? Are there accompanying physical symptoms like profound changes in sleep architecture, appetite shifts, or psychomotor agitation that suggests cyclothymia or a thyroid irregularity?
You're looking for biological fingerprints.
Exactly. A worry diary captures the cognitive thoughts. A mood tracker captures the biological weather system those thoughts are occurring within.
That makes a lot of sense.
A skilled therapist has to differentiate between a cognitive what-if spiral, which will respond beautifully to CBT and behavioral experiments, and a purely physiological mood swing, which will not respond to cognitive restructuring at all.
So if a patient has both, let's say they have severe GAD and they also have emotional lability from a recent concussion, how does the treatment adapt? You can't just abandon them because they don't fit perfectly into the clean 2019 Dugas and Robichaud model.
You have to fundamentally adapt the pacing and the interventions. And sometimes those adaptations directly contradict the standard GAD protocol.
Contradicted?
Yes. For example, the WebMD text on treating emotional ability suggests using cognitive techniques like taking specific structured breaks to avoid sensory overload.
Which is an avoidance behavior.
Yes. And it also explicitly mentions using distraction techniques like actively trying to think of a peaceful, calming image when a labile episode begins.
Boy, that is a massive contradiction.
Yeah.
We just spent 20 minutes explaining that for GAD, you must not distract yourself. You must use imaginal exposure to face the terrifying image head-on to force habituation.
Very good.
But for emotional ability, the medical advice is to distract yourself with a peaceful image.
Precisely, because the underlying mechanism of the distress is entirely different. With GAD, the problem is the cognitive avoidance of a hypothetical threat. To fix it, you must expose the brain to the thought.
Okay, I'm tracking.
But with emotional ability, the problem is a neurologically overwhelmed system that has lost its biological ability to regulate its own arousal. Exposing an emotionally labile patient to their absolute worst fear through a worry script wouldn't cause habituation. It would cause a severe psychological decompensation.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
Their nervous system would short circuit. They need immediate downregulation and soothing, not exposure.
So what does that mean for the timeline of the overall treatment plan? It sounds like you can't do both at once.
Or you often can't. It means that sometimes the deep, rigorous cognitive exposure work of CBT simply has to wait.
You have to stabilize the hardware before you can update the software.
That is a perfect analogy. The patient might need to literally wait for brain healing to occur if their lability is from a traumatic brain injury.
Or what about the cyclothymia patient?
In the case of cyclothymia, they might need pharmacological intervention, like a mood stabilizer, to establish a baseline of biological predictability before they possess the consistent cognitive capacity required to engage in the behavioral experiments of the IOU protocol.
It's like trying to build a complex multi-story house on top of an active earthquake fault line. You have to stabilize the ground first. If you start pouring the concrete foundation of CBT while the earth is still shaking, the house is just going to crack and collapse.
And the worst part is...
And the patient is going to feel like it's their fault for failing at therapy.
Exactly. And for the therapist, it demands a high degree of clinical humility. It requires them to recognize when a pristine, evidence-based protocol isn't working, not because the patient is resistant or failing, but because the biological weather of the patient's nervous system is simply too volatile for the cognitive tools currently being used.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, and we went deep into the machinery. Let's synthesize the core takeaways from this deep dive.
Sounds good.
We started by looking at the neurobiology of anxiety through the UEMA model. We explored how an anxious brain suffers from a judgment bias, disrupting the expected value calculations of the ventral striatum in OSC.
Which leads to a massive overestimation of threat.
Right, and a hypervigilant amygdala looking for tigers in empty rooms.
We then walk through how clinicians systematically dismantle this exact process using the intolerance of uncertainty CBT protocol.
We saw how they use worry diaries to separate real, actionable problems from hypothetical what-ifs.
We exposed the exhausting reality of the worry cycle, and we looked at how therapists challenge the deeply ingrained, culturally reinforced positive beliefs that patients hold about their own worrying.
We dove into the crystal dome, examining how the blizzard of hypothetical worries blinds us to the actual problems we need to solve.
The silver versus the gold tickets.
We saw how safety behaviors become the things we do to try and control uncertainty, like over-preparing, checking, or avoiding, actually prevent our brains from learning that the environment is safe.
And we discuss the intense, brave work of behavioral experiments and imaginal exposure needed to force the brain to habituate to the unknown.
Finally, we examined the wild cards. We explored how systemic physiological mood disruptors, like the unpredictable swings of cyclothymia or the neurological misfires of emotional ability, can completely disguise or derail this logical cognitive process.
Because the CBT protocol relies heavily on the stabilizing power of strict cognitive routines.
Right. Unpredictable biology requires clinicians to adapt. They must often prioritize biological stabilization and nervous system soothing before they can engage in deep exposure therapy.
You really have to respect the biology.
So bringing this all back to you, the listener, why does this matter if you don't have a clinical diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder or cyclothymia or emotional ability?
That's the real question.
It matters because we all possess a risk assessment department that sometimes misfires. We all experience the profound discomfort of uncertainty, and we all develop idiosyncratic habits and behaviors to try and cope with it.
We all have our own version of the crystal dome,
where the silver tickets of hypothetical anxieties distract us from the actual golden opportunities right in front of us. And we all occasionally put on the heavy 70-pound firefighting gear to hose down sparks that aren't even fires.
And this raises a final provocative thought to mull over, drawing one last time on Professor Starr's insights regarding the psychology of routine.
Let's hear it.
Starr notes that our routines, or the glaring absence of them, are ultimately a behavioral record of what we have actually chosen to prioritize, regardless of what we claim our values are.
Wow.
So I invite you to ask yourself, what do your daily automatic safety behaviors reveal about what you are secretly afraid of? If you spend 2 hours every night perfectly organizing your inbox or scrolling for reassurance, what specific uncertainty are you trying to manage?
That's a deep question.
And what might happen if, just for today, you decided to drop one small safety behavior, leave the firefighting suit in the closet, and let a little bit of uncertainty into the room?
I love that. Maybe it's time to realize that the dark room you're standing in doesn't actually have a tiger in it. Maybe it really is just a misplaced coffee table. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of anxiety. Keep questioning your assumptions. Keep learning how your own machinery works. And maybe, just maybe, let the silver tickets fall to the floor today. We'll see you next time.